It's time to go to some questions. I'm going to be greedy and take the first one. We've got a couple of people here from the US. We've got a couple of people here from Europe. John, what are the challenges, opportunities, differences between the US and Europe on this big data question when it comes to business and entrepreneurship?
I think one of the differences is the way that the US and Europe looks at data in general. And I know there's a debate going on right now in the EU around new data privacy regulations. And one of the challenges is, on the one hand, we all recognize the value of data and the importance of data for business and for healthcare and for societal advancement. But at the other hand, we all also recognize that there's concerns around data privacy. I think that between the U.S. and Europe, we sort of look at the same issue slightly differently. I think the U.S. has an approach of we want to make data available, but we want to restrict things that you can't do with data. I think in some ways the approach from Europe is we want to minimize the amount of data that is available, but make exceptions for uses of data. And it's in some ways just a different way of looking at the same issue. One way, I think, makes data generally available. Another way, particularly some of the discussions that I know are going on right now around data minimization. You know, don't collect more data than you need, don't use it, don't keep it. And that can present some challenges for taking advantage of all of the many things we've been talking about, the amazing things you can do with data. Well, if you don't have the data, if you can't collect the data, if you can't share the data, if you can't use the data, then a lot of the things we haven't even thought of will never happen. And I'm not trying to minimize the importance of data privacy. It's very important. But sometimes I think we can trip over ourselves in how we set up these regulatory regimes.
Okay, any questions from the floor?
On one hand, I can see the benefits to me as an individual, knowing what conditions I'm genetically predisposed to. But equally, I don't want an insurance company to turn around to me and say, you're uninsurable. So where is the balance in this?
We had an interesting discussion about it yesterday at dinner as well. There's a difference between insurance and mutualization of risk. Yes. In the European system, we all are privy to a certain joining or in risks and rewards. Yes. The challenge that you have is allowing insurance companies to focus their policies on healthy people and only collecting premiums and never having to pay out. Yes. So it's not per se on what information is used, but allowing companies to use that data. So I think that the challenge is more there. I don't think you solve the puzzle by restricting what data is generated, but how it is used by these companies. I think that's where, on the one hand, of course, you have to leave the initiative, but you have to put regulations in place. And that's also what the US has done. They've created a specific law on using of genetic information in those businesses, the GINA Act, that restricts the use of genetic data by these companies specifically.
And that sort of goes to the point that the collection of everyone's DNA data to analyze how to solve difficult health problems is a good thing. Using it in the way you just described, I don't think is a good thing. And so we should prohibit that use, but not prohibit the collection of the data and the use of the data for the broader societal good.
And is the DNA information also available for criminal purposes to solve?
DNA forensics is now an integral part of how justice departments and police departments work. The creation of DNA databases. I mean, you have to have a debate about it whether you want to do it or not, but it's perfectly possible to do so, yes.
Any other questions? Okay, please wait for the microphone to get to you. Can you tell us your name as well, please, and your position?
Hello, it's Kate Hoffman, and I'm on the EIT Young Leaders Programme. It's actually sort of two questions in one, mainly as a result of the last speaker's talk. I think maybe we'll talk about this in the next session, but there seem to be some quite interesting ethical questions around why and how we make use of big data in healthcare. You mentioned about orphan diseases that pharma's not interested in, and how big data can really help with that. Are there any other examples of how we could use similar technology to solve wider kind of social health problems as opposed to individual health problems? So, for example, waterborne diseases or malaria, or again those areas that perhaps traditional pharma's not so interested in. And secondly, my other question was around the example you gave of Down syndrome, which I think is a really interesting one, because it kind of seemed to me like you were suggesting that we needed to be able to tell people whether their unborn children have Down syndrome before they give birth, and that implies making I think a moral judgment one way or another about what you should do when you have that information. And I think these are really interesting, they're really interesting things to discuss. And if we have the technology to make that data available, are we, or is your company, for example, also looking at how we, as a society, discuss how to use that data?
The ethical impacts are huge, I fully admit. The desirability of certain tests or the availability of certain tests is a question in itself. You're absolutely right. The conclusions that you take are individual conclusions in the end, but it's as a society that we have to decide where we define norms or what is allowed or not allowed and so on. It's a huge debate, I fully agree. Down syndrome I mentioned Down syndrome because it touches us all, basically. We all know somebody, basically, that is impacted by this. Yes, I've known parents that absolutely wanted to know, others that do not want to know. I mean, but that's an individual choice. And we've made as a society the decision that these tests make sense, yes, to inform people. And when I talk about other aspects that could be linked to it and so on, like comorbidity, sensibility to cancers and so on, there's good therapeutic reasons to be able to do diagnosis and so on. But I fully agree, yes, you have to have the debate about the desirability of all this and how you deal with it and so on. I think that should not stifle us. Sometimes by taking the leap you go further. By allowing genetic testing, for example, there's now a new technique coming on the market where parents have a genetic disease. You can do IVF. You can have a debate about IVF, but imagine that you do IVF. You can fertilize, let's say, 10 embryos. It's now possible to take of these 10 embryos, of each one single cell, on a single cell check the DNA and select the embryo that does not have the disease. Yes. Now, you can take it one step further. You can select for sex, you can select for hair color, you can select for, that's all coming our way. I fully admit that is coming our way. But on the other hand, a lot of good things come with it. Yeah? So I don't think we should be afraid of that, just have the debate about it. And that's the main message.
I actually also want to build on what you just, on the question and what you just said about the difference between United States and Europe. And I think the kind of a problem in a way that I see in Europe, and that's why I actually moved to the United States, is that in Europe we always take the approach of whatever is new, we are really afraid. And we really want to solve all of those ethical questions before doing anything. Whereas in the United States, as you just said, it's more about, no, let's by default allow innovation to happen, and then let's restrict the things that shouldn't be allowed. And I think, like, as an entrepreneur, one thing that is important to know is really, as entrepreneurs, we want to do good. We don't want to screw the world. No, we want to create value. We want to change the world in a positive way. And in Europe, when you are an entrepreneur, you feel like you actually need to fight against a lot of walls in front of you because people take the default assumption that you are going to do bad things. And so in the debate about, and I know it's a really important debate about all of those genetics, I guess you have to have this conversation again and again. So I really admire you for your passions and all of that. But why don't we can just like empower people to take the decision for themselves? Because anyway, like why the European Union or why even our own government should take the decision on behalf of ourselves? Now that we have access to technology, we should be able to take the decision for our own families. And I'll give you an example. I just like in the United States, I have no idea if the service is available in Europe, but there is this website called 23andme.com, and so actually for $50 I was able to sequence my DNA, and so I did it. And so you can go on their website, you have your full DNA available there, and they also give you like different statistics, but also like based on different research, like the probability that you may have that disease and things like that, or your origins. I think it's really interesting. And you have a lot of more like ethically problematic, like do you want to know like if you are gonna have Parkinson or Alzheimer of those diseases, and they actually give you the option. Like they don't tell you. They say like you need to confirm 2 times. Are you really sure you want to know? And so I think it's great. Like that's a way where actually they didn't stop innovation. Like hey, the technology is available. Let's enable people, entrepreneurs, to build up businesses on top of that, and give the technology to the hands of people. And some people would want to know, others will not want to know. I've even seen people who copy-pasted their DNA and put it online on GitHub. So GitHub is this service when programmers and hackers are using to collaborate on code. And so you can fork DNA, literally. So anyway, there's a lot of different innovation that can happen if you trust a bit more entrepreneurs. We want to do good.
I'd like to comment on that a bit. I'm not going to comment on the quality of the service of 23andMe. It's not $50 for your full DNA, and what they produce, I mean, but they do a lot of good. And what they do very good is they try to indeed empower people. That's a question I didn't answer yet, in fact. It's about these orphan diseases. If you ask the parents of sick children whether their data of their children can be shared, they absolutely say yes. Yes. And what I think we should do is empower people much more. Yes. People will come together. Yes. They will create these interest groups about specific syndromes, diseases. They want the best for their children and want the best for other children with the same thing. Yes. And big pharma are interested, but they are interested. And they'll chip in money as well. They will organize their own trials. Yes. What we should do is empower these people to do so. And that's a different kind of economy or value creation, which is not happening yet. And online platforms and giving people the data and giving the information only empowers that. And I think that's a huge thing to come our way.
Okay, let's have a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up for lunch. A question down here.
Well, just a remark to this interesting discussion about databases, and maybe the most fascinating database which have been given to us by the evolution, I mean the human genome with 3 billion base pairs. Number one, I'm absolutely positive, not quite surprising being an entrepreneur by myself, that we should openly say information is always good, and the more we spread it and the more databases we have, the better decisions we can make. And we should really make people being really citizen and being allowed to do their decision. And I think many things have been mentioned. I think parents of disabled children, they are more than happy to provide all kind of insight and help that maybe new treatments can be made. But there's also one thing, and this is communication. And I guess communication is don't raise false expectations. And I guess just to take a few examples have been taken, I mean, only 2% of all breast cancers are linked to the breast cancer genes. And I think 98%, I think, are differently environment, it's very complex, and we don't have a clue even. We should say anyway, it's only a very small number of genetic diseases which can be traced back to a single gene. And I think I say this to you as a young entrepreneur, the more you are open and spreading also information on this, the less resistant you get, because then you really don't start a fear culture. The other thing is, for the next generation of entrepreneurs, we mentioned orphan diseases. I think one dilemma is, of course, if, and this is the same statement I made about half an hour, 2 hours ago in the former panel, in the end of the day, you need incentive structures that entrepreneurs and industries are developing treatments against orphan diseases. And I guess this has been practiced, and for example, Genzyme, a very famous biotech company, has become successful in focusing their programs on orphan diseases. But they were able to because there are legislations in the United States which has incentivized biotech companies focusing on those rare diseases. Okay, it was just my
There's a
contribution.
gentleman who's very keen to ask a question down there, keeps waving at me. Can we please pass him a microphone?
Hi, thank you for making that available. I'm Commodity Strategy from the European Young Innovators Forum, and I had a question for John and Xavier in particular. We've talked a lot about privacy issues and ethical issues on open data and big data and applications, but actually, do you see that this whole big and open data is causing a social shift, that there's a new way in which we're interacting with our fellow individuals, and is that driving a shift not only in terms of what we do online and the interactions, but also how we do it?
Well, there's no question that social media didn't exist 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, and so there's so much that's being driven through the use of social media. Sentiment analysis is one of the things that's being done, and one of the programs we did, we were able to predict unemployment that was going to happen in a country months before, based on what the people were discussing about canceling their vacations, or not buying a new car, or taking public transportation, or just concerns about their jobs. And when you're able to sort of predict the future based on what people are talking about, that's never existed before. So yeah, it's completely changed the paradigm. And I want to respond to one thing that you said, which struck me as it's important to have incentives to have innovation, but it's just as important not to have disincentives. And one of the ways you have disincentives is to have unclear rules and high fines for getting it wrong. The best way to keep a company, a small company, a big company, any company, from investing or innovating or trying something new is to make it scary to do so. And that's what worries me so much about the privacy debate, is just about all data now has some element of privacy to it, some element of personal information, because all the data that we're putting out there about ourselves and about our friends, it's all personal data. But the ability to use that and access it and do new and innovative things that we haven't even thought about, I'm a lawyer. When people in my company go, hey, I have a great idea, let's do that, I go, no, because you'll be fined 2% of our global turnover. That's multi-millions of dollars. Oh, okay, well, I won't do that. Well, that's not really what you want in order to create an innovation, and that's the concern. And I don't have the answer for it, but I do think it's a point that needs to be discussed and thought about when we're thinking about what we're going to do about data moving forward.
Okay, last one from Xavier in response to the question over there.
+1. Just second everything that you just said. I think it's just retweet or whatever.
Since we're getting ready to eat soon, I was wondering if genetics in healthcare could direct to genetics in food. Would be nice to learn much about food, since most of the disease we were talking about are caused by food.
There is a lot of research in that as well, the genetics of food, in the sense that to crop design and so on, that's one area where there's a lot of genetics. There's more on the biotech, so the building of new products and so on. There's also what is called the metabolomics, where people look at how food is digested by the body. So you have many layers of complexity in the human body. You have the DNA, you have the proteomics, you have the metabolomics, the bacteriomics. The bacteria in your gut are determining at least 50% of your health. People learning that as well. So there's huge things, and all of these different areas, by the way, it's data analytics. There's more organisms, more bacteria than normal cells in your body, basically. And to look at the statistics of that and analyze that and look at the impact of that, it's a huge field in itself. So there's much more to come that is empowered by data analytics.
Okay, I think it's probably time to wrap it up, and thanks very much to EIT for this session. Thanks very much to Wouter, John, Hassan, Xavier and Herman.